Okay. All fed and watered and relieved, hopefully. Okay. Well, I haven't finished this little diagram yet, so I want to focus on, by the end of the day, I want to finish this diagram. So, trouble is I don't know where I'm going to put the rest of the gear that I want on the diagram, so I'm just... Yeah. Right. Okay, so hopefully by now you sort of start getting the idea that we want to focus more on the principles than on the individual issues we face. If you focus on the principles, every individual issue will be faced and will be dealt with, and you will change emotionally if you focus on the principles. If you focus on the issues, one of the problems with focusing just on the issues is that if an issue doesn't bother you, you won't focus on it. The problem is a lot more of your issues bother God than they bother you. In other words, they're in disharmony with God's laws, but because they don't bother you, you're content to continue doing them. So if you focus only on the issues that bother you, in other words, the sins you're aware of or the pain and suffering you're aware of, and you only focus on that in your life, you will not get close to God. It's guaranteed pretty much, because the world we're living in is saying if you have these issues, then it means you've got problems, and if you have these issues, it means you haven't. An example of that is they say, if you're a pretty emotional person, then you've got problems. Right? God's saying, I want you to be a pretty emotional person because then you'll be more sensitive to when you break my laws. But people are saying, you're better off being stoic. And this is obviously a very thing, it's a big thing here in England, isn't it? To be stoic, to be polite, stoic, quiet. A lot of emotion hidden behind it all, but unfortunately, there's this sort of motivation to be detuned from emotion, which is quite strong. So we want to focus more on these principles. So there are some more principles we need to discuss before we can sort of discuss more details about life. The first thing is this line. This line is the line that the Lord draws in your life. This line has some characteristics or features. Firstly, it's not negotiable. That line. The line the Lord draws is not negotiable. You see, with human society, we're very used to negotiating with law. We're very used to breaking law and getting away with it, right? You see it every day, really, in what we do. It's funny when we go to different countries, everyone likes breaking laws in different ways as well. Here in England, you're very polite in England, aren't you, when you come up to those areas where you've got a street that's really 1.5 cars wide, and then you got, one of you stops and waits for the other one, and then through, they're very polite there. But when it comes to things like speeding, most people are used to breaking law at least a little bit, like 5 miles, 10 miles up above, We noticed that when we were driving down from Linton, wasn't it? On the M40, wasn't it? We drove down, and we also, Mary and I last week went to a medium, and we had to drive a fair way to see this medium. It was in a public setting like this, where a person was doing some mediumship, and we had to drive all the way down the M1, I think it was. Man, that's a nightmare driving down that thing, isn't it? With all the things going on. And everybody pretty much, it's really interesting when you come to the areas where the cameras are being shown, It's like everybody's right on that limit, like perfectly. Like if it says 40, everyone's 40. But when the sign that says don't, I love this sign. I've brought up this before, but it's a really impractical sign. So that means do any speed limit? Is that what it means?
Choose your own.
Should be right, I'll do anything. And that's how a lot of people seem to act. Like it means do any speed limit. I understand here it means 70 miles an hour or something, does it? Or go back to
60.
60. That's what I'm saying.
What if you're going to put up the sign? Just put the number.
Just put the number. Like, you got to put a sign anyway. Well, you might as well write a number on it. But no, not very practical. But anyway, it seems to be whenever that sign is there, it's sort of like, everybody's pretty free for all. And because we're so used to breaking the law, we think most of the time on earth, when you break a law, if it's in a small or minor way, you got a fairly high likelihood of getting away with it. But also there's some particular laws that are still pretty easy to get away with, even though they're major problems, like child abuse, sexual abuse of children is a major problem. And yet the majority of people who break that law do get away with it because there's not a lot of evidence or proof, or, if you had spirits involved, they could just say, yeah, he did it. Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't need any more evidence than a celestial spirit saying he did it. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Because then you'd be like, did they do it? Well, we don't have to go through a very long court case. Where we got, in Australia, there was a Catholic priest which was accused of child abuse. His court case went on, I think it was for 11 years. 11 years or something like that. You imagine how much public funds that was, and all the trauma for the witnesses that had to be brought up all the time. And man, it just went on and on and on. And he appealed a couple of times as well. And it just went on and on and on. He eventually was convicted and put in jail. But, if you just ask the celestial spirit, did he do it or not? All solved in 5 minutes. That'd be wonderful. Right, but because most of us won't accept that kind of evidence, I suppose you could say, which is actually the best evidence there is. A celestial spirit is in perfect harmony with love, knows the circumstance, the situation quite easily, reads the soul of the individual. Yes, he did it. And that would be of benefit. But unfortunately for most people on earth, even with things like child abuse, they think they can get away with it. And that's why it continues, because there's this constant feeling that we can get away with almost anything nowadays on earth. And you see this in the criminal enterprises, don't you, on earth as well? But you even see it in day-to-day life. The average person is not a very law-abiding person because they do feel that the law is negotiable, right? And the trouble is, when we're being brought up to believe such things, we then think when we talk about God's laws that we're talking about the same thing. Oh, I'll get in front of God and I'll be able to negotiate. It's like, what are you talking about? I only did that a little bit. Why are you getting so hard on me about it? That kind of feeling is what we often feel towards God.
Or I think it's been a favourite of mine in the past, like, can't you see what else I'm dealing with? Mine's a special case, or
I'm handling a lot here.
There'll be an allowance for this. Yeah.
I'm coping with a lot here. Let me get away with that as well, that kind of thing. And so we often have these feelings that God's laws are negotiable in that regard. We also think that they are sort of movable. On earth, if you've got a bit of funds, if you've got a bit of funds on earth or something like that, you can sort of negotiate with the law to a degree by saying, well, for me, it doesn't really apply. I'll just put some money towards it or something. And on earth, a lot of times, it's about a fine, isn't it? So you can see why, it's interesting when we watch the people who are speeding on your highways here in England, because most of them are driving BMWs, Mercedes, like pretty expensive cars. If you look at the average person speeding versus the car they use, you can see that they already have a fair bit of money. So of course, if it's just a fine of some kind where they're not impacted immediately and the situation is immovable, then of course they can go, well, it's only £300, so I'm flooring it. If they've got £300 to spare, why not? There's no other real penalty. Of course, if you had an accident, of course, there might be more penalties, but most people go, well, I'm not going to have an accident. Everyone will get out of my way. Okay. So we think everything's movable, not negotiable. And in particular, we think my case, my situation, my case, my personal circumstances means that there should be some allowance that's made. Because my case is, just like I am, my case is special. I've got good reasons for why I do what I do. And unfortunately, when we look at these problems, when we say the case is special, from God's perspective, we need to write obviously the opposite to these things. Right? So it's not negotiable, it is unchangeable. So they spell unchangeable. And I'm not special. They're equal in the way that they are applied. In fact, they enforce equality. So every person who does the same thing will be treated the same way. Every person. Right? There's a beauty to that because it means every physical problem that a person ends up having, say like a disease, it's always caused by the same cause. Right? So a disease in a certain area of your body, always caused by the same cause. So let's say the disease is cancer and it's in the right breast or something like that, then it's always going to be with regard to white breast, it's always about nurturing. It's always going to be nurturing men. You're over nurturing men. You have a preference to nurture men for the sake of getting worth and for the sake of feeling that you're a loving woman. Or nowadays, men get breast cancer as well, of course. So for the same reason. If it's in the same part of the body, it's the same problem. This is the beauty of it. It's equal. The issue is equal. And these laws are done in such a way that they are enforcing the standard, God's standard. So they're enforcing the standard of love. And when you break them, of course, there is no negotiation with it. It's not negotiable. It means you break it, penalty. You break it, penalty. It's going to be the same penalty if you break the same law. That's beautiful because it means everything is consistent from God's perspective. Yeah? It's only humans that change the result of these things frequently, isn't it? By allowing you to get away with things that God doesn't let you get away with. And this is something that is really confusing for a lot of our spirit friends that are with us today. They are wondering why, many of them are wondering why they're in the hells of the spirit world or not in a nice place in the spirit life. Because they think they lived okay lives. They think they lived lives that were fine, that were not, they were just average lives on earth. There was nothing outstanding that they did that was bad. And so they have the feeling that they did the right thing while they're on earth, and yet they also they realise that where they are now in the spirit world is not happy. And the reason why they're confused is because on earth they were taught if you just live normal earth life, then you were relatively good. But it's God's standard of good, not earth standard. And so the majority of people who pass into a state of confusion because they go, but I was good. Why am I here? I don't get it. Like, what's going on? And the reason why they're in this state of confusion is that they were never educated that it's not their standard of love that gets applied. It's God's standard of love that gets applied, not theirs. And God's standard of love is unmovable. It's not going to change whether you think it should change or not. It's not, and you can't negotiate with it. You can't change the law itself, and you can't change its results. On earth, to a degree, with law, you can go into fake places and get different results. An example of that is a little child is quite often taught right from childhood that all they've got to do is say sorry, and it means they are sorry. But see, God's laws are more demanding than that, because they say you actually got to feel sorry in order for the sorry to be accepted. All right? But on earth, it's like somebody says sorry, and even when they're a little child, they say sorry, and everybody sort of acts like they've forgiven them, but the child isn't feeling sorry. So how come? How come? You see, in the spirit world, you say you're sorry, you can say you're sorry thousands of times, but if you're not really sorry, nothing's going to change. Because the law exacts more from you than that. And most of us from childhood are taught the opposite. And so that's why we have this very fluid view of the law. We think we can move it around, change it to suit our special circumstances and so forth. So this is something that is very important to understand. When you obey, these are definitely going to be the results from the law's perspective. Now, they may not be the results that humans visit on you, because they have different standards. But they are the results that God will give you, because they are God's standards. And these are definitely the results that you're going to get if you disobey the law. And we need to probably add more to the results. There's things like worry. Many of these spirits who are with us at the moment are worried. They're worried about where they are, why they're where they are. They're confused. This is another result of disobedience of law, is confusion. These are all results of some disobedience to law. You follow? Anger. Another one. And unfortunately too, in this state, we attract dark influences around us when we're desiring to disobey, because there's a lot of people in the spirit world who also continue to desire to disobey, and they find it harder in the spirit world to disobey. So what they do is they come to earth and try to influence you to disobey so that they can have their disobedience. An example of that is when you pass, let's say you're a drunkard and you pass. Well, there's no alcohol in the spirit world. It can't actually be physically manufactured in the spirit world, right? Because the way in which you imbibe things in the spirit world is through smell, not through taste or things like that. And so what they do is they overcloak a person on earth, trying to get that person to drink, right? So that they can enjoy what they think is enjoy their drink still. But the trouble is the person on earth is drunk all the time, and sometimes is barely even conscious, that they're still sitting up drinking, because they've got a number of spirits around them just keeping them upright and keeping their hand going, pouring it down. And it's very, very sad, because the net result of that is the person on earth ends up in the same place, dependent upon alcohol, just like the people who passed are. But also the people who passed don't deal with anything else. So they're still breaking law more. And then they get darker and darker in their condition, to the point where they can't break the law anymore because they don't even have enough energy to break the law anymore. That's how extreme it gets. And then, of course, they get all angry and upset about that as well. So there's the evil influences that come from spirits. And when I say evil, let's call them another name, dark, shall we? Or you could just say any spirit out of harmony with God's law, to a degree, is going to have some kind of unpleasant influence on your life. Now remember, it's not until the sixth sphere of the spirit world that a spirit is actually in harmony with the laws pertaining to their treatment of another person. So that means that any spirit below the sixth sphere is still potentially able to influence you in a negative way. Right? Now, of course, by the time usually most spirits arrive in the third sphere, they no longer have that intention. And in fact, even to get to the second sphere, you can't have that intention. So that's great, because it means that the spirits who have more power have that less desire to influence. Right? So that's fortunate. But by disobeying, you're encouraging attractions of evil spirits to you. And this is something I'd like to say to many of you young men in the audience. We see many dark spirits with you at different times, and many of you are attracting them to you through different practices. Some of those practices are to do with drugs, like marijuana and ayahuasca, or all these sort of plant medicine type things, which are really just drugs. I find the whole attitude to drugs interesting, because everyone says, oh, they're just plants. And I go, okay, well, there's other plants that are totally poisonous and you'll die within seconds of taking them. So you want to take them too, do you? You see the reasoning behind it all is the drugs help me get away from emotion, but I don't want to die from them. Although, when you think about it, many people do, right? Because they overdose them and everything. So
you were just going to list some of the things that cause the dark spirit attractions to the young men.
Yeah.
So there's the drug taking, pornography also attracts a lot of spirits.
Yeah.
Sexual injuries with the opposite gender attracts a lot of spirits.
And the same gender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sexual injuries in general,
yeah.
but acting in those. I mean, the list goes on and on, but just probably for this.
But fundamentally, it's because of a disobedience of God's laws happening at some point.
Yes.
Yeah. Many young men they are in a state of feeling less than their fathers, but not wanting to feel that. And so they want to attach themselves to dark spirits to make them feel more powerful and strong. And that in itself is also a sin, because you're trying to avoid emotion by having the attachment. So there's all sorts of reasons why a person will enter this state of disobedience, which then causes dark or evil spirits to become connected to you. And they're very hard to shake, because your own feelings are in harmony with theirs. So that's why they become hard to get rid of. While your own feelings are in harmony, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of them. Right? So there's a lot of quite negative results from disobedience. And if we analyse the results of disobedience, can you see how much trouble it's causing us? Like, even having to correct and repair is trouble, really, isn't it? Like, you're going to have to do something. It's good for you that you're going to have to do that, but at the end of the day, it'd be better if you didn't have to. It'd be better if you're in this column where you didn't have to correct or repair anything. Right? Living a life on earth where you live it in harmony with love and truth means there's less to correct and repair when you pass. Right? Now, most of us, when we're on earth, hardly consider our future. And I don't mean our future like in the next 10 years. I mean the inevitable future that you're going to die, your physical body is going to die, and then you'll be in the spirit world, that future. Hardly any of us consider our future. We're not planning for our future, learning about our future, and also understanding that many of the things we do in our present are going to influence our future. And we don't have to be that way, be scared of it. We just need to realise that if I live this way, my future will be bright. My future will be without these things. But if I live this way, even though I think it might be good now, my future is guaranteed that these are the things that I'm going to get as a result of my living this way, out of harmony with the law. They are going to happen because the law is unchangeable, not negotiable, and it happens to everybody who sins the same way I do. In exactly the same way. of all the things that spirits in the spirit world would like to tell humans on earth, that's the thing they'd like to tell you the most. Take more notice of the life you're living on earth, because you're visiting upon yourself a dark future if you continue to disobey. So, bearing in mind these things, can you see, if I have these things as feelings in me, like that I feel this is true, then my actions on earth with almost everything I do will change. But if I have the idea that this is just a philosophy, this is just some guy claiming to be Jesus coming to tell me a philosophy that he obviously believes, but we don't really know is Jesus, and we don't really know whether it's true, right? Well, you'd be far better off believing me for your future than you would not, right? Because I can guarantee to you, this is how it is. This is the fact of life. And once you can understand and feel that in your own soul, which God's truth through the conscience can be confirmed to you about, then you will live a different life from that time on. And that life won't be so focused on your earth life anymore, in the sense that it won't be focused on getting the things that the average person on earth desires. It'll be focused on planning for your future. And a part of planning for your future is planning for your spirit future. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you're only going to be here if you're lucky. When I'm unlucky, I think more. If you're unlucky, you'll be here 100 years. If you're a bit more lucky, you might be here 80 or something like that, right? And I say that on purpose because there's a lot of beautiful things in the spirit world that while you think here is better, you're missing out on. Right? So if you're lucky, you'll last 80 years here. Luckier, 70 maybe. Extremely lucky if you hear God's truth while you're on earth. Extremely lucky, right? Because that's going to change your entire future, right? Then it doesn't really matter how long you live here. You could live here a couple of 100 years and it'll be fine because you've planned for your future already. And the rewards of doing so also include physical rewards besides spiritual ones. But this is very important to understand at an emotional level. That makes sense? At an emotional level. All right, so there's one other thing I need to introduce in the subject, and then we can get a free-for-all on all your questions. Does that make sense? So that's the first part of it. And if there's any questions specifically related to what I've already mentioned, I'm happy to answer them now before I moved on to this second phase of the next thing I would like to talk about, which is to do with the hierarchy of these laws.
I have a question.
Mary has a question.
Would you like to mention that obedience is better than sacrifice and repentance?
Yeah, you can see from the table that obviously if you obey, all you get is rewards and there's no trouble or trauma. You can see that? And the only trauma that's ever going to be caused on earth, if you obey, is the trauma coming from other people. It won't be from God or the laws. And when you pass, there'll be no trauma if you obey. On this side, if you don't obey, then obviously there's quite a lot of trauma in this, isn't there? There's quite a lot of trouble, worry, confusion, hard emotions to deal with, hard processes like correction and reparation are difficult processes too. And there's quite a lot to deal with. So I often say to people to obey is better than to disobey. Right? Or you could say it another way. All of these things are going to require from you different sacrifices. They're going to require you taking time to repair things, you taking time to correct yourself. They're going to require paying the penalty, the time taken to pay a penalty. They're going to require changes in your emotional state so you're no longer evil. They're going to require things of you. You could say thus sacrifices you're making for the sake of your sin. Can you see that? These things are the things you're paying for your sin. Right? So they are sort of sacrifices you're choosing to make for the sake of having your sin. You follow? So another way of saying it is to obey is better than a sacrifice. Does that make sense? And if you know your Bible, you know that it's a quote from the Bible. To obey is better than a sacrifice. It's far better to obey God's laws than it is to go through this process.
Sometimes we have people say to us, oh yes, I know that's a sin, but also I know you've taught me how to repair it, so, I'm just going to continue.
I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah. Or I know it's probably going to I'm going to have compensation. Or actually, I know this is compensation, but,
I like it still.
I don't really want to change it yet. And in that state, you're not really aware of just how much time you're wasting, if you think about it. Because how much penalty is going to be demanded of you? The penalty takes time, Even the reparation and repentance process it takes time and effort on your part, where you could be experiencing instead, if you had obeyed the law, the rewards and the kind of expansive life that you could be having. Because Jesus is talking about these things happening after we pass, but really this process is upon us even now. All the worry we have, all the fear we have, all the turmoil we have right now is really is a result of us disobeying the laws. And the faith and the happiness we have in our life when it's not addictive is all about us having obeyed God's laws. So there's it's a lot more economical to obey God's laws from the outset.
Not only that, the emotional turmoil you experience in this state is extreme. There's been people I've seen in the hells for 2,000 years experiencing absolute agony every day because of this. Right? It's extreme. And most people don't appreciate how extreme and painful this state is either. They don't understand that on earth very much at all. And if you think of all the spiritual paths you've ever heard, do you ever hear anybody really saying the truth about anything to do with spirit life, really? Like when you go to a medium, this medium we saw last week, it was really interesting. He had 5 people come, and they were all in very dark condition who came to speak through him. And every single one of them said nothing about the extreme agony they were in. But Mary and I could feel their agony. And in one case, one man, he was in so much pain about his 2 children that all he wanted to do was talk about his 2 children and apologise to his 2 children and tell them how much he's sorry for all the things he'd done. And the meeting wouldn't let him say it. So, because the medium believes there was no pain in the spirit world. And we've met many, many mediums who believe that. Not true. Not true. You will find that most of your pain that you experience from sin will be in the spirit world, actually. And that's why it's good to know these truths. Okay, so let's come here first and then up to James at the back and then...
AJ, I just wonder, is it a sin to not speak up about how I feel or not speak up for myself?
Well, I would say it very much depends on the circumstances. It's a sin to not be transparent about how you feel. But in terms of speaking up, well, I don't want to dump my feelings on you, so I don't need to tell you how I feel. I need to feel how I feel. The sin is me not feeling how I feel and then dumping my feelings on you, right? The need to speak up about your feelings is often an addictive demand, which is actually a sin. If you truly experience your own feelings, you'll rarely need to discuss them with another person. And even when you do, most of the time they'll just come and say, like if it was a celestial spirit helping us, he'd just say, well, you need to feel that. I'm off. I don't need to listen to your story. I already know it. You know, you're the one who needs to understand and know and feel your story and work your way through it to the point where you experience the pain of it. That's how a celestial spirit would help you. He'd say, and if you're going, well, what's my next thing? They'll say, here's your next thing. See you later, I'm off. He's not going to sit down and discuss it with you ad infinitum. He's just going to point out your next thing. Do you want to deal with it? If you want to deal with it, you'll search, you'll discover, you'll try, connect to yourself emotionally. So you won't need much assistance from others aside from just saying, here's your next thing. Good on you. Go for it, type of thing.
So then, because I feel a lot of spiritual influence right now,
yeah,
like a lot of dark spirits. Is that something? Am I getting that because I'm not feeling those emotions, or is it?
Well, for many of you younger men, a lot of the reasons why dark spirits are surrounding you at times is because you are in a state of submission to them. And it's because of a lot of times competition feelings with your father, where your father has treated you quite badly. And so you're looking for spirits to make you feel more powerful or make you feel more self-assured. And as a result of that, you attract spirits who want power over you, who are willing to give you a sense of self-assurance. But the penalty is that they're going to take over control of your life to a degree. And this is something we notice with a lot of young men we meet. So again, it's like the sin is not working through the emotions to do with your father in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That'd be the sin. And that sin results in the penalty of attracting men around you that dominate your life, and some of those men will be spirits. And then they dominate your life. And we see that with a lot of young men actually, in particular. Because they're yet to connect with they have this sort of oppositional feeling with their own fathers, so they're yet to connect with their own masculinity, and they want to feel strong when they're around other men, so they need some bullying spirit men to make them feel strong. And the only trouble with that is those bullying spirit men are probably going to bully you as well. Yeah, and that needs to be addressed. In other cases, it's because of what they get through you. So in some people here, they get to have sexual experiences through you. So for some people that's the case, not for yourself, but for others. And what happens there is that the spirit is saying, I want the sexual experience, so I'm going to motivate you to have the sexual experience, and they start setting up relationships, setting up contacts. They're like a portable, is it Tinder? Got you on the shoulder. It's like a spirit setting up all your sexual liaisons, right? And the result for the person on earth is they get to feel like that they're like approved of by women, or women want them, and so they get a lot of addictions in that regard, but they're just getting darker and darker and darker as they engage that behaviour. More and more the spirits get connected with the person, and before you know it, the spirits really control every sexual liaison they ever have. Right? And every sexual liaison is not between you and another person, but it's between you, some spirits, and another person. And so oftentimes the women involved, if you're a man, the women involved often feel like they're being touched up by more than one person, and they are. Oftentimes that's often the case. So there's all these sort of negative effects of that occur, but the average person goes, but I want sex, and I want to feel. There's a big emotion, there's a big feeling that emotions, sex will satisfy my emotional insecurities. That's in the human race. And so as a result of that, they engage this very dark, evil influence. And many people who've had a life like that arrive deep in the hells of the spirit world. Almost as deep as people like Hitler and Stalin and those people, almost. That's how bad it is from God's perspective. And yet it just continues because of the sexual sort of demand that people have, the demand to feel good, but also the demand to emotionally feel good in the process. So these are all ways that engaging the disobedience. So the disobedience is we even disobey with our own self-perception. God thinks all of you are equal. God thinks and treats all of you as such. God feels that all of you have value. When you believe you have no value, you are disobeying the law. Does that make sense? So all of you who feel that you have no value are disobeying the law. And this is one of the biggest things that I've had difficulty with in this life, is working through that so I'm no longer in disobeying the law. God's law is about love of the individual. Right?
So if I'm putting myself down, basically.
Correct. That's a sin. Yeah, that's a disobedience of the law. You need to treat yourself as equal to another, not greater, which is a disobedience of the law, or lesser, which is also a disobedience of the law, but equal. Now, to have a feeling of equality requires you working your way through emotions that are quite tough at times because you don't feel equal. And that's what causes you to act in a way that's not equal. And other times we act not equal just to get things from people, just to get approval. Like we know this person here thinks, one person here thinks this and one person here thinks that about me. And if I put myself down with that person who's superior, he will give me things. Rather than going, no, I'm equal to you, man. And acting in that way, then the person who wants to be superior might get angry with me and I'm just avoiding rage. But that's a sin too. Avoiding the rage, any emotion from another person is actually a sin. Because the object is not to avoid them, but to actually be real about them and to understand they're occurring. They are all sins too. And this is where, when you start analysing sin, the average person thinks, oh, it's when I hurt somebody physically, or when I murder this person, that's a bad sin, or when I, did this other harm to my children or whatever, that's a bad sin. But all those things are not good, but it's all the sins you don't know about that are going to be your main problem, not all the ones you do. The ones you do, you've already sort of got some level of awareness, in the sense that we talked last week about, so those of you who weren't here with us last week, we recommend you listen to last week, because we talked about the difference between awareness and awakening to sin. And many of us have a level of awareness, like we're sort of intellectually aware there's a problem type of thing. Awakening is this emotional feeling that you know exactly what it is, and you know that you don't want to do it anymore, and you want to repair it and correct yourself. And the awakening process is a requirement for you to have a relationship with God. Because if you do not awake to your sin will prevent the relationship. Yeah. And for most of us, awakening is a difficult process because it's all the things you're not aware of, it hasn't even crossed your mind, let alone your feelings. All of those things, they are the hardest things often to address because you haven't even thought of them yet, and yet you do them. So these are the kind of things that require a deeper understanding of self in order to deal with.
So then, sorry, just last bit, that's okay. So then in terms of this situation where I'm attracting a lot of spirits coming, attacking me, I know that the truth is that I am equal, and that I don't deserve the attack.
Yes.
Love would demand that I love myself, as well as loving them in such a way, not attacking them back.
Correct. So not attacking them back, not abusing them back. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how could I act in harmony with God's law in such a situation? Like, should I remove myself from the altar?
Well, again, the attraction is caused by an emotion that exists within yourself. So the high priority would become to deal with that emotion, so you don't break the law of equality. The law of equality is a very big issue of love. So every time you treat yourself as lesser than another, you're breaking one of the biggest laws. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, most people don't get that. They sort of think, I'm kind by treating myself as lesser than another. I serve the other. And that's, service. Mary and I serve you a lot, but we don't view ourselves as lesser than you in doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the attitude would need to be, I have an emotion that is a sin. The emotion is, I think I'm unworthy. I think I'm less. I need to deal with it. I need to work through that emotion. If I work through that emotion, the spirits that keep treating me badly will no longer have the power to treat me badly. The way they treat me badly is through whatever I need, whatever I believe I need. That's how they treat me badly. And they won't have that power over me anymore if I treat myself better and don't give them any opportunity to treat me badly. Right? They will leave. So all I really need to do is address how I feel about myself. Now, for the average person, that's pretty tricky because they don't want to address how they feel about themselves because that requires some feelings that are unpleasant. And so they don't want to feel those feelings. And in the process of avoiding those feelings, they continue to sin. Hence the continual thing occurring in their life where they put themselves down, encourage other people to put them down as well in the process of putting themselves down, and so on. And so you end up encouraging, and of course the law of attraction in this case, is trying to help you deal with it. And the only way it can really help you deal with it in this corrupted world is by bringing you instead of bringing you a nice person saying you don't need to do that, the average person on earth who notices a person putting themselves down will take advantage of them, won't they? Yeah. So unfortunately, the attraction is going to be people trying to take advantage of you all the time, right? That's going to be the attraction. Now, of course, if you're in the spirit world, that possibly would not be your attraction. In the spirit world, some people would come along and say, look here, mate, you're putting yourself down all the time. You need to address this, right? And they'd be kind with you about it, right? But on earth, there's very little kindness. Most of you know that already, don't you? Most of you know there's very little kindness. In fact, when you get kindness from somebody, it's like, wow, like, isn't it amazing? It's beautiful. But it's very rare, unfortunately. And this is why often the attraction on earth is, we keep attracting people. Like in the case of, if I'm putting myself down, I'll keep attracting people putting me down all the time. And that'll tell me, there's my problem. So at least God's still, through the law, able to tell me the problem, even if he can't tell me the problem through the conscience. Yeah. So once the law is telling me the problem, and the conscience is able, then I'm now aware, so now the conscience can also share that this is also a problem. Once God can share with me the severity of the problem, because it's attracting a lot of bad things into my life, then of course I will have a strong motivation to address it. Yeah. Of course, if I'm terrified of people, and in particular terrified of powerful people, terrified of authority, which is a problem that you face, right?
Yeah.
Then it's going to be hard to deal with. I've got to deal with my terror of authority as well, don't I? To get to be in an equal position with others. Yeah.
Thank you.
James is next up to bat.
I'm trying to understand and wrestle with this feeling that kind of this distinction between having some kind of good intention and that maybe was in harmony with law, and some like good qualities in myself that were in harmony with law.
Yep.
But those things have like taken me really off track, and I've ended up doing things way out of harmony with law. It's
not those things that are taking you off track. Can I explain why? And this is very important to understand.
It's so important not to blame the
good things.
Good things, the pure desire.
Yeah, what you're doing is getting into the after hearing these truths, there's two ways a person generally goes. They either go, but I've got good intentions, but all those good intentions seem to have misled me. And then it's not the good intentions that are ever misleading you. So that's the first thing you need to bear in mind. It's the bad intentions that are misleading you.
I guess I'm questioning even if I had good intentions.
Well, I do feel you have some good intentions. Yeah.
But it's important.
But there's a very powerful bad intention that's misleading you. And so this is what we need to discuss. Okay? And perhaps this is a good, firstly, a segue into what I wanted to cover with everybody about priorities. So let's deal with the priorities and then answer this question, if we can do that. Now, you were present last week, James, weren't you? So you already know that some about these priorities that we talked about. Yeah. So let's just remind everybody of those priorities. So the highest level of things you can deal with that are going to have the best long-term effect in your life are what things?
Spiritual.
Spiritual things. So that's the highest priority. Now, these are things like, an example of it is equality that we just mentioned. Being equal. That is a spiritual concept and therefore of the highest priority. Follow? Yep. Now, the next one down was? Emotional. So these kind of concepts are relating to how I feel about things. So it's like, how do I feel about equality? Do I want to be equal to others, or do I want to be less, or do I want to be more powerful than others? Do I want to be considered to be special, or do I want to be considered to be normal? Right? I keep saying to people in Australia, I'm the most normal guy you're going to meet. I'm not special in any way. I'm like, I'm not highly intelligent. I'm not highly clever on any issue. I'm not highly educated, actually, either. From the perspective of the world, I'm not highly educated. And all of my education comes from God. So actually, it's got nothing to do with me as to what I know. It's got everything to do with just the relationship, the desire I have for the relationship with God. So I don't credit myself with anything bar a few things that I have had to develop myself. And they are things like my humility, I've had to develop myself. My faith, I've had to develop myself. Does that make sense? But when it comes to truth, receiving truth, almost all the truth I've ever received first came from me, firstly, looking around me and seeing, which is an important thing to do, and becoming self-aware, but eventually it just came from God, like the truth. So all the truth I'm sharing with you comes from that source. So it's not my truth, it's not anything to do with me, right? I'm also, I have areas of passion, and I'm pretty, I like my areas of passion, I investigate all these areas of passion. There's many of you don't know yet, but in the spirit world, I'm an artist. Some of you will see my art in the spirit world. I've got grand galleries in the spirit world of my art. And I'm a musician as well in the spirit world. Some of you will hear my music eventually in the spirit world. You will. But all of the things that I'm able to do, I am only able to do because of the love I've received, and I'm very conscious of that. Does that make sense? So, the way I sort of see myself is, I'm just this child of God who's very inquisitive. That's what I am. I'm just an inquisitive child of God, and I'm probably, if anybody said, well, how inquisitive am I? Well, I'm one of the most inquisitive people I've ever met. So I'm a very inquisitive person, right? So in that regard, but I'm not looking for power over others. I'm looking to learn. I'm looking to understand. I'm looking to be a student of God, a child of God who, the way I sort of see it is, God wants to educate me, and the more open and humble I am, the more I'll get educated. That's sort of the way I view it. So I have a spiritual condition which is also based upon humility, which is actually a spiritual quality. It's a quality, if you develop that quality, it's going to help you for the rest of your existence, and it's going to lead you to a state of bliss, actually, that one quality. If you appropriately engage it in harmony with truth, it will lead you to that state. The truth will set you free, but it's your humility that allows you to receive it. Yeah? So here I am, I've got spiritual is the highest, emotional is the next highest. What was the next one?
Sexual.
So these are things to do with our sexuality, laws that govern our sexuality, our moral condition with regard to our sexuality. And then the last one was?
Physical.
So you could say this is like a hierarchical system of the way to engage law. Now, when you focus your attention on the spiritual, your life will change the most. right? So that's a general principle each of us need to grasp and understand. Many of you believe you change your emotions, your life changes the most, after you've heard divine truth, of course. Many of you believe that, but it's not actually true. It's when you change spiritually that your life changes the most. Right? So that's something that we need to come to terms with. Yeah? Now, the question, so let's look at the question you've asked. You said that I've got some good intentions. So what do you believe are your good intentions?
To try and help, to be in service.
Help others?
Yeah.
Be of service?
To help change the environment.
Yep, so to be more environmentally aware and help the environment
and
improve.
Be part of regenerating.
Yeah, so regen of environment. That's a, I'll just put it short, regen of environment. So, you know, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because obviously we all got to live here. And also it's good for your children and grandchildren and so forth as well, because they've got to live here too if they're going to have a life on Earth at all. Okay, so these are good things. Anything else you can think of off the top of your head?
Yeah, just have a real passion to like try and make it so when children come, it's not so hard. Like to have
okay, so
children arriving.
Yeah. Okay. So, shall we say? Well, let's put it what it is: care of children. Not just care in terms of day-to-day care, but care for their future. Yeah, which is a nice quality. Sure, certainly. No problem with any of those, is there? They're all in harmony with the law of love, are they not? Yep, so no problem there. Okay. What are some emotions that you have and spiritual beliefs that you have that start corrupting these ideas?
I'm better than everyone else.
Good. So superiority. So I'm better than everybody else. I know or understand this better than everyone else.
Like stronger, more powerful.
Power, yes, power, big one. It gives me power over others. They become more influenced by me. Yep. So that's power. Yep. Any others you can think of?
That people adore me. That I get.
Very good.
Put on
Yeah.
pedestal.
Adoration.
Pedestal, that's a good word.
Pedestal is a good word. Yeah, pedestal. This is demonstrating good self-awareness, James. So it's good. So a good thing here, some self-awareness. Here's another good thing. We'll put that on that one. Right, that's good. Okay, can you see? These things lead me to do some good things. These things are going to corrupt my good things. Can you see that? Yep. Now, can you see how powerful the corruption could be? You know, if you have a be of service feeling, but at the same time want to be superior and have power over others, can you see where it can lead you? It can lead you into some very dark places with some very dark spirit influence. And in fact, you do have some quite dark spirit influence around you, leading you, because they can feel in you this feeling and this feeling in particular, and this feeling. They feel it in you very strongly. And so they're surrounding you, trying to use the truth of you wanting to do these things against you. Does that make sense? Because they know you have these flaws. You could call these things are disobedience to the law, aren't they? Yeah? Disobedience to the law of equality. Disobedience to the laws governing humility. Yeah? Disobedience, and this involves even sexual adoration, by the way, because that's something you're prone to. And so, you know, a lot of women have a tendency to adore you, you know, look up to you. And this is also part of the feelings that you're wanting. So with this set of feelings, can you see, you might have these motivations, but these sets of feelings, which are also motivating you in a sinful manner, at the same time as these feelings are trying to motivate you in a loving manner. And can you see it's just the severity of the problem, you know, in other words, internally, how you measure how much you need a thing, right? That's going to determine what the outcome is. And unfortunately, this has been a bigger severe problem than this is benefiting you at this stage. Does that make sense? Because what's happening is these things are growing, right? And the problem with them growing, so you could end up doing these things in a state of humility, right? Or you can end up not doing these things at all and these things dominating your entire life. That's sort of what you're facing right now, actually, as the internal battle. You could think of this as an internal battle for your soul. The sin, which is these things, this is where you're breaking the law and desiring to break the law. These things is where you're trying to do good and not break the law. So these are the things where you're doing loving things, trying to do loving things. And here's where you're trying to break the law, you could say, right? And you can see it's just how much importance you place on each thing's relatively that's going to determine the outcome. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah. For yourself, if you place as much relative power positioning of these things as you currently do, it's going to end up in a very dark location for you. So this is the thing I would be working on for you, is these things. Now, the reason why I brought up your specific example and latched onto it is because it illustrates the basic points, doesn't it? That the feeling of being superior is a spiritual problem. It's not just an emotional one. It's a disharmony with the equality laws, the laws of love governing equality. Does that make sense? So it's actually a deep spiritual problem that is being faced there. The desire for power is also a spiritual problem, because actually, if you think about it, if I truly understand my position in the universe, God is the one with the power, and God is the one with the laws, and all I am is his creation. So any power I actually have is gifted to me. It's not actually really mine. It's a gift that God gave me because he created me, he created my ability to express myself and everything else. So he gave me those powers, right? So when I want those powers for myself, I've got a spiritual problem. So adoration is an emotional problem, right? Because it's sort of like, if you're only doing things, or if you're doing things because you get adoration, then you're going to be very influenced to do those things more, right? And that would then is an addiction. See, what I find is that I do things because they're just right, not because I'm adored. And the reality is very few people on earth adore me at this point. I could probably, maybe five people on earth, maybe, right? And so I'm not addicted to adoration. I'm used to the opposite, actually, being constantly attacked and belittled and condescended to, and even the spirits with you want to condescend to me. So, I'm used to all that. They get annoyed because it doesn't have a lot of effect on me, but it's, the need for adoration is going to be, it's like a vortex that is coming out of you, like needing it from other people. It's actually, I see it as a weakness in the soul, the need for adoration, because it's going to mean you're only going to end up doing the things that people adore you for. Yeah. So, yeah, desire to be on a pedestal, another spiritual quality, because God wants us equal. The only time God gives us anything other than equal, like responsibilities, Mary and I have responsibilities, but it's only because we already know ourselves to be equal, And that's one of the reasons why we're given the responsibilities, because we understand that probably more than most people do. So being on a pedestal, spiritual problems. So can you see a lot of these problems are actually spiritual problems? They contain emotion, right? So obviously the desire for power comes from powerlessness issues in childhood generally, or the feeding of power in childhood by one or both parents. In your case, by mum, it seems to me, has fed a lot of your feelings that you're her ideal son for a while in your childhood and through your teenage years. So this has fed the feeling of desire for power and superiority, you know. So these things are going to have to be addressed because, and if you address them, you're addressing spiritual problems. So that's going to have the biggest effect on your life. It's going to have a wide-reaching effect if you address that. Firstly, just addressing those will get rid of all the negative spirit influence you're under. The whole lot of it will probably go just addressing those 4 things. Does that make sense to you? And the beauty of addressing those things is then you have some clarity in terms of what is actually my desire versus what is the Spirit's desire to do that so they can get that. What is the Spirit's desire to do that so they can get that? So at the moment, they're sort of motivating you to do many of these things because you believe them to be good. And so they can easily motivate you to do them, but their object is to get this, their addiction met. Right? So their object is very dark, really. And they don't really care what happens to you in that process. And they want you, of course, to be in harmony or agreement with them so that they can have a stronger bond to get these things from you. You follow? Yeah. So this is very good. This is the fact that you have some self-awareness. Remember that we said last week, awareness is not an awakening. You remember we said awakening involves feeling all of this, like how sort of bad it is in the soul, and then wanting to change that. Awareness is, I know that I've got these things happening, so that's very good that you at least know that, because a lot of people in your position, with the amount of spirit influence you actually do have, are not even aware of that. They don't even aware that these are problems that they're facing. Now, it's not that that's leading you astray. So all of the pure things relating to the obedience of God's laws are not leading you astray. And these things will bring you rewards if purely motivated. So they'll bring you rewards. But it's that's going to bring some severe consequence. And the other problem is one spiritual fact, a very important spiritual fact, I think I mentioned it last week, is if you become a teacher of others, you must make sure that what you're teaching is true. Right? Now, I don't mean expressing your opinion. There's many times people ask me my opinion, and I'm saying, well, my opinion is this. Now, God, you're allowed to have an opinion, and as I said earlier, my opinions change on a daily basis. So an opinion is fine, as long as you're not teaching it as a fact. Right? As soon as you start teaching it as fact, you're now setting yourself up as a teacher. Now, if you setting yourself up as a teacher is not really a God-appointed assignment, now you'll be going to be teaching others falsehood. That destroys lives. And in fact, most of you don't know this, but the people who are in the worst places in hell at times are the people who, not Stalin and not Hitler and those kind of people, but the people who taught falsehood, that generations of people. So you think about Stalin and Hitler, these people influenced or harmed people just in their generation. Once they died and the people who were harmed by them died, the new generation is hardly harmed by them anymore. When you set yourself up as a teacher, it's every generation for thousands of years can be harmed. Can you feel the significance of the difference? One set of people harm just the generation. The other set of people were harming people for thousands of years. So, for example, the people who corrupted Christianity, many of them are still in hell and they're in a darker place than Hitler is. Right? So that's sobering if you look at that. And this is why bringing yourself into line with spiritual principles is very important. So it's actually very dangerous for you to teach others why all these conditions exist. You follow? And in fact, the spirits with you are using your desire to do this, right? And your desire to have these feelings against you. agreeing with you doing that as long as they get that.
And you can see how you even end up questioning. If you think about your question, you got to this point where you're like, do I even have these things anymore?
Yeah, you're questioning that. And that's not a good thing to question, because these are good things. What needs to happen is the purification of them, so there's not tainted by the error or the sin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've been trying to figure out, like whether I need to stop, so I've stopped a lot of things happening when I started to realise it was happening. So I've stopped a lot of it. Part of me wants to just stop anything to do with that list on the right. But I think I just got to figure that out.
The best course of action is to start looking at these things more seriously and to start addressing those things, the desire for those things. It's the desire for these things that attract the spirits helping you with those desires too. So the trouble is they are motivated to connect to someone like you to have power over others. You're also, for different emotional and spiritual reasons, desiring the same thing. So now the good things that you want to do get tainted by, you could say, the bad spiritual and emotional condition that exists. If you can address the spiritual and emotional condition with more sincerity for yourself, then doing these things will not be dangerous at all. You won't enter into superiority with others. You won't be, enter into I'm better than you because I'm helping you. You won't enter into, some kind of damage of children by teaching them things that are actually out of harmony with love. And your self-awareness will turn into self-awakening, like you'll awaken to the problems and the sins you face, and these things will eventually disappear. Yeah. So you don't give up the good.
Yeah, and can I say this is a lot how, if you like, evil wins on earth. We meet a lot of people who say, I was doing this thing, I thought I loved it. Some of it's not even those things. I just loved it. And then I realized, I've got all these addictions and injuries, and I was actually harming everyone with what I thought that I loved. So I'm just going to stop doing what I love, because obviously it's harming people. But actually, you still walk away with these same issues and just take it to the next thing that you do.
Yeah.
And so the evil continues, but the aspiration for good has stopped.
Yeah.
So it's a very important lesson.
So in that way, sort of evil is won.
Yeah.
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 So not a good thing to do. Huh? Yeah. Thank you. You're fine with that answer? You get that? Yeah. Good on.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, James, we're not saying just carry on and just deal with those things as a side issue. No. It's
obviously these are the sin. This is, remember, if we think of this diagram here, if we just keep turning on there. If you think of that diagram there, can you see that if I can focus on stopping myself doing these things through, obviously it's going to have to be an emotional and spiritual process that stops these things. If I can stop these things, then anything I choose to do will be in this category. And therefore I can, every one of those things you listed of what you want to do, you could do every one of them and it'll all be fine. There'll be no problems at all. No, it'll in fact benefit you, benefit your future life now and in the spirit world, as well as benefit others. But if you live in this place, not dealing with some of those spiritual problems, then you can see you can take actions, but they're all going to be tainted by the sin. And then as a result of that taint, there's a sort of like a thing that happens that you end up almost making little decision here and another 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 little decision here. And really what you're doing is stepping into hell as you make every little decision. And for most people, they don't realise that. So let's say my condition is here, and then I make a little decision, and then I'm working along there, and a little decision, I'm working along there. In terms of my condition of love, you can see it's only by looking and comparing before that I'm going to probably see that I've changed. And this is something that happens on earth with everything, including the environment. Most of us are not noticing the change. We're making a little decision here, a little decision there, little decision there. Oftentimes we think we're being better with it, make a little decision, but we're not understanding that if you compared, say, the environment here, not in England so much, because England had tens of thousands of years of little decisions to result in the current environment you got here, which is utterly devastatingly destroyed. And if it wasn't for rain, you would be in bad trouble here in England, right? You're already in bad trouble, but you'd be in a lot worse if it wasn't for the fact you got regular rainfall. In other countries, we see, like Austria, they're very similar, like huge destruction that's happened over centuries, and every generation didn't notice the little bit of extra they were doing and the little bit of extra they were doing. And the key in your life is to become sensitive. That was a little bit darker than what I was doing before. You know, something's wrong here. You know, I've got to stop this trajectory, because if you just do a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, before you know it, it's going to be black, you know. And this is the trouble we face in the world as well with the environment. We're all sort of doing a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, not measuring the results very rapidly. And as a result, there's going to be some pretty dire consequences for the whole earth ahead of us, because we're not noticing the little bit that we're doing, you know. So before, I just raised the issue of toilet paper, which seems to be, right, a really innocent issue. But you can see there's spiritual things involved in it. Like, everything has a spiritual thing involved in it generally, a spiritual attitude, you know, involved in it. Like, the spiritual attitude of economy is involved in it. And that's a beautiful spiritual attitude. If we develop economy in everything we do, life is going to be a lot better, right? So it's a beautiful spiritual attitude, but most of us, we don't notice the decay of spiritual attitudes very rapidly. We generally only notice the physical thing. Because remember last week we talked about being physically, sensorially centric. In other words, we're just measuring the senses of our body, taste, touch, you know, what we can smell, see, hear. That's the way we measure everything. And as a result of being sensorially bound, right, God's intention was that we weren't going to be bound by it, but we use it to interface with the world. But many people on earth are bound by their senses to the point where unless something is so obvious, they can't see there's really any change, unless it's right bang in your face. So the interesting thing was COVID. COVID was a bang in your face thing, wasn't it? Right? But your rights as individuals, what I mean by that is the free will that we should be given as individuals has been eaten away by your governments for 40, 50 years. During the wars and afterwards, Second and First World Wars, and afterwards, your rights have been slowly eroded more and more and more and more, and the average person didn't notice until COVID. And when COVID came along, now this video is probably going to get banned, right?
Yeah.
Because I mentioned COVID, but anyway, another problem, right? And once that came along, it's in everybody's face, and when it's in everybody's face, now they become aware, our rights are being controlled here, or our free will is being controlled here, right? But it's been going on for centuries of time. And most of us don't notice because it's just eke a little bit out. And unfortunately for most of us, it's the same with our sin. We just do a little bit more. Our intention is not to end up in darkness for the most part, but because we're just doing a little bit more, allow a little bit more. And you see this happening in the world today everywhere. And I see it in the young people in particular everywhere. Like, you look at the sexual issues that young people face nowadays, there's been so much erosion of sexual morality that now there's no such thing as sexual morality almost. Right? So it's just eaten away to the point where, from God's assessment, it's dark as dark sexually. And yet, you know, the average person doesn't really see it very much. They see it more as progression. Yeah, freedom, interestingly enough. So, yeah, very important. And so it's a very good question. Really the question is, I'm doing something that I think is good, but why is it that it doesn't always turn out good? And the answer is because there are corruptions involved in the good. Yeah. Good day. Johnny, down the front here, and then over there on that side.
I'm just going to give you a heads up on the time.
What's the time?
3:30.
3:30, okay.
Yeah. In case you
Over
wanted
there,
to
and Johnny.
hit your principles governing law.
I wasn't going to do that today.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. It was just that I wanted.
Just that one.
Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Johnny. Yep.
In regards to the priorities,
Yeah.
priorities,
Just hold the
mic
mic.
a bit closer, yeah.
That's it.
is it possible to define what is spiritual matters, or to summarize it? Or,
Okay. Yes, very possible. So let's do that. Spiritual matters are always principles. Do you know what I mean by a principle?
Yep.
Yep. So if we look at principles, and this is very important to bear in mind for most of us, that principles to God are far more important than other things, right? And the reason why I know that for certain is because God's laws are stricter when you break a principle than they are for any other thing, right? So spiritual matters, let's look at spiritual matters, are principles based on love and truth. Right? That's what a principle is. Now, tomorrow morning, what we're going to do is mention some of those principles that and if you want to do a bit of homework tonight, if you're up to it, there's a 2016 assistance groups that can be downloaded from our website if you go to downloads and choose events in 2016, you'll find in there's a series of assistance groups that we did. And the very last two groups, which were done, I think, in November. October and November, or just November? I think
November.
November, I think, of that year. So those should be at the top of that list because we list everything in reverse order that we do it. You'll see there's two groups that are called God's Loving Laws, right? And in the God's Loving Laws group, we mentioned principles that are based on three main areas. There were what we called fundamental principles, right, which are sort of the basis of how the entire universe sort of operates in terms of the laws governing the universe. And in amongst those, love and truth are two of those principles. But every one of God's laws has a connection with fundamental principles that are listed in that group. And then there was order-based principles, which to do with things like hierarchy, scope.
Things that enforce order in the world.
Yeah, things that enforce order, like governance and things like that. And then the last group of principles we called soul-based principles, which are principles specifically created that govern the human soul. Right? So God created principles like love and truth, for example, principles, they govern everything. Like you could say they're the fundamental building blocks or the fundamental structure of the universe. And then there's order-based principles which order the universe and keep everything orderly, which includes keeping your emotions orderly, keeping your sexual and physical life orderly and your spiritual life orderly. So these apply to all of these conditions. And then there's specifically principles that God created just because you are God's highest creation. And God needed some specific things that applied to his highest creation that didn't apply to anything else, that the other things don't have self-awareness and they don't have free will. And so God created a set of principles that guide the beings with free will and guide the beings with self-awareness, right? And those things are soul-based principles, and those list of principles govern, which are all based around love and truth. They govern your entire spiritual life. And when I say your entire spiritual life, your entire life is governed by your spiritual life, right? So they all connect, all of these things here, we would classify them as spiritual principles, laws governing spiritual principles. And all of those things, and I think we, by the way, there are far more than what we listed. We only listed, I think, 13 total principles in amongst those groupings. And God has hundreds of them, but the 13 we listed are the most fundamental.
17.
Sorry?
17.
17, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 17 we listed are the most fundamental in the sense that if you can get your life in harmony with those 17 principles, you're going to be in harmony pretty much with every single law God's ever created. Right? If you can get yourself in harmony with those principles. So I suggest that, as a bit of homework, have a look at that third group.
Now, you don't have time to watch all the videos.
No, not tonight.
It's a long time.
No.
But there are actually PDF handouts that we did for each talk that are well worth, they're things you can read
download
quickly. Them. You can download them from the website and, there's good.
And and just read through them.
Yeah.
And you won't be able to read through them all tonight, of course, because there's quite a lot. We did 30, well, total we did nearly 70 hours of video in just the discussion of those things. So obviously it's going to take you 70 hours if you're going to watch them. And if you're going to read them, it's going to take you quite a few hours, so maybe not tonight. But we recommend you do so because it will help you understand what the spiritual part of your life is. Yeah. Now, all spiritual parts of your life do affect the emotions and do affect the sexual and physical parts of your life. An example of that is one spiritual thing, which is a soul-based principle, is to do with how your soul works. And humility is actually to do with how your soul works. When you allow emotion to flow through your soul, then your soul works better than if you don't allow emotion to flow through your soul. So every time you lock down an emotion, you're actually disobeying a very fundamental spiritual law. You're breaking the law that governs the functioning of your soul. Right? Now, your soul requires that you feel and experience everything in order for it to pass through you. If you lock it down, if you suppress it, it won't pass through you and it will get stored in you instead. Right? Now, this is a very fundamental principle, spiritual principle about how the soul works. So when we teach that principle, people go, but yeah, I've got my emotions. And I go, yeah, the reason why you got your emotions is God created you to be an emotional being, to have these emotions pass through you. And the reason why you got the emotions is you didn't let them pass through you, or somebody else didn't let them pass through you when you were young. And most people go, but I got the emotion. I go, yeah, but this is, the principle is you got to let it pass through you. You got to go through the experience. And they go, but I don't want to go through the experience. I know it's going to be painful. And I go, too bad. You're going to have the experience. You're going to have to go through the experience, because if you're in harmony with the spiritual principle of how the soul functions, you will want to do it. You'll get to the stage where you want to do it, and it won't matter to you how painful it is, because you know that any pain that exists in your soul, if you experience it, will go and pass, and it will be gone. And once you believe that, you will start doing it. But you have to believe it in your feelings to do it. And once you believe it, you will do it. Now, most people on it don't believe it, and so they haven't done it. But it's a spiritual principle governing how the soul functions, right? And so that's an example of a spiritual principle solving a soul problem. But if you block an emotion in your soul, what happens, interestingly enough, is your two bodies, remember you're half of the soul. So, Johnny, you're a half of the soul and you've got your half of the soul, and you know your attraction is?
Women. Women?
Yes, so you know the other half of your soul is feminine, yes. Right? Now, if you block an emotion in your half of the soul, then something in your body is going to go wrong. because there's no energy now flowing through your body from the emotion being blocked in that soul in a certain area, will affect a certain area of your body. So let's say you block yourself to love. Well, what's going to start happening is you're going to start having heart problems. Right? In your physical body, they'll start developing heart problems. Firstly, the energy stops in the heart area of your spirit body. And then because there's a silver cord connecting the two bodies together, the heart in your physical body also gets affected by it. So if I solve the spiritual problem of allowing myself to love and not holding on to my sadness about love, then I'm going to fix my heart in my physical body. So that's an example of how me understanding the spiritual problem is solving a physical issue. You see? Yeah. So a lot of us want to, when we get a physical problem, we go, I just want to fix it. Like, I got heart disease, as people say. I just want to fix it. What do I do to fix it? Solve the spiritual problem. Is the way to fix it. The spiritual problem is you're not allowing yourself to feel your sadness about love. That's the spiritual problem. Right? You're sad about love. You have an emotion about love that's locking you up with a belief that's false about love. You think that if you block love, you're protecting yourself. That's a spiritual problem. It's not how the soul works. If you block love, you're blocking the flow of love through your soul. If you block the flow of love through your soul, you will even block self-love in your soul, and as a result, your heart will develop a problem and you'll die. Your physical body will eventually die from that problem just because of the spiritual problem that caused it. That makes sense? Yeah. So if I examine that and I think, right, these principles, these spiritual problems, and we define them as principles based on love and truth, right? If these spiritual problems can be resolved, I not only will resolve my spiritual problems, but I'll also resolve, which are all my beliefs and all the things I believe and think, and I'll be open to receiving truth from God, so I'll now know what to believe. Not only will all that be solved, but I'll now deal with some emotions and release some emotions that are in disharmony with with love and truth, right? In other words, I'll deal with all my sin. That'll be gone. And all my sexual and physical problems will just disappear if I do it, right? So can you see, if I focus on dealing with my spiritual problems first, it's the most economical in the long run to dealing with any problem. But most people go, forget about spiritual, forget about emotional, forget about sexual. I want all of those things happening the way they currently are. But I'm getting heart disease. Tell me how to fix it. And I'm going, well, this is how to fix it. You fix the spiritual problem. But I don't want to hear about the spiritual problem. I want to, you tell me what to do. So the doctor, when you go to the doctor, he tells you what to do. What does he tell you what to do, Phil? You're a doctor. Heart disease. What are you going to tell him what to do? Microphone. What are you going to tell him?
Well, it's usually medication, isn't it? Is what a doctor will tell you.
Right. So what kind of medication would they have to take?
Depends what sort of disease it is.
Let's say I had a blockage in the valves of my heart with fat deposits and other things. What would I do?
You probably need to be on some aspirin.
Yeah. So thinning my blood.
Thinning blood, yeah.
Yeah. What else would I need to do if I had bad heart disease? I've got to change my diet, don't I? Would you recommend that?
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Phil?
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't resist that every time. So he recommends that you would also change your diet and whatever else. So what is he doing? He's recommending physical solutions to a spiritual problem. How's that going to go? It's not going to work very well.
It gets worse and worse, Jesus.
It just gets worse and worse, doesn't it? And you know, and this is it's frustrating for doctors, is that they have all of this medication now and all of these prescriptions and all this medication, and usually by the time a person reaches my age or older, 60s and 70s, they've got on so many things that it's like a pot puree.
You can hear them rattling when they walk. Because all the pills in their tummy.
Yeah, basically. Well, they're rattling, carrying them all in their belt bag, with their days of the week on them, and yes, it's a problem. But because the focus is just fix me physically. You see, a doctor who is just responding to your demands to be fixed physically, without dealing with a spiritual problem. But if everybody understood, no, there's spiritual problems that cause emotional, that trigger all of these other problems, and we deal with these spiritual problems, we'll fix these other problems. If everybody understood that, you'd go to the doctor and you say, I've got heart disease, doc, and he'd say, okay, what we need to do is put you on a regime of opening your heart and dealing with all the reasons why you're sad about love and what's going on in your history. We have to send you to a psychiatrist who's going to help you examine what's going on in your history to find out why you've locked yourself down with regard to your sadness about love and everything. And you imagine giving that advice. The average person would go, what the hell are you talking about? Like, why are you I just want to come here and give me a pill. Give me a pill. And as any doctor well knows, the average person just wants a pill because they don't want to deal with their spiritual problems and they don't want to deal with their emotional problems. Make sense? Okay, so where were we next? Over there we were. Yep.
Hello, thank you for being here. It's Philippa.
You've forgotten now.
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago.
It was a question that I also had last week, was around the UK specifically. What are the biggest emotional injuries here that you feel prevent progress?
The very single biggest is what I would call a conspiracy. Right? But it's not going to be, if you know me well, I'm not sort of into conspiracy theories very much. But this is the biggest conspiracy.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Single biggest conspiracy on earth. Don't feel, be afraid of your feelings. Be afraid. You can't handle them. You're never going to be able to handle them. Do whatever you can to avoid them. Single biggest problem on earth. Basically, the biggest problem on earth is humility. Yeah, that's why we don't know much truth yet. That's why we don't hear from God yet about many things. It's why we don't understand much about the spirit world. It's why we don't get life in terms of how God created it to be. Because fundamentally, we don't like humility. We don't want to feel, we would rather stay afraid and live in our fear instead. Biggest problem on earth, without a doubt. Of course, that particular problem begins by some other deeper spiritual problems, which is, I don't want to accept that God exists. I don't want to accept God's laws. It really begins there, doesn't it? But that's the big problem, because if I can't develop this spiritual quality of humility, I am very shut down to any other form of development. And it's going to be very, very difficult for me to change and grow and develop all the things that God wants me to do. It's going to be very hard for me to do without humility. Humility is the beginning, you could say, of change. But before humility, there's something you're going to need to have.
Mm. And actually, this is something that John mentioned for this group, isn't it? That's quite a block here. I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say.
Well, I don't know if you do, but we'll see. Because that's not what I think. But,
it's not what you're going to say.
The biggest block to humility, what do you reckon it might be? So firstly, we don't have faith in truth about humility. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that we don't believe with all of our heart and have a desire to understand the truth about being humble. Right? We don't want to know the truth about being humble. The truth about being humble is it's going to lead you to all truth. It's going to eventually lead you to love. It's going to also create huge changes in your life because you'll be humble about making changes no matter what the results. Right? So can you see faith is a spiritual quality? Truth is a spiritual quality because they're principles. And humility is a spiritual quality. This quality belongs to God. Is that not true? And this quality, humility, so truth belongs to God, only God, not yours. Humility belongs to you, me. It's up to me, and faith is up to me. So to solve that biggest problem, no one else, I am going to have to develop faith in God's truth about me being more humble. I'm going to have to develop faith and I'm going to have to develop humility. And if I do that and ask God about what the truth is, I will change. You follow? If you could boil all of humanity's problems down to one problem, that's the problem. There's no faith in God's truth about humility. Lots of faith in arrogance, lots of faith in self-opinion, lots of faith in people who are arrogant, lots of faith in science. You know, like how many times I hear that science is going to solve the world's problems. And I'm going, how is that going to be the case when it's caused most of them in the first place? So, you know, there's faith in all these things that don't work, and yet we don't have any faith in humility because humility requires me to feel something, doesn't it? It requires me to feel something. I won't be answering any more questions, by the way. Not today. Humility requires me to feel something. Without humility, I will not feel. Right? If I don't feel, I can't change. I can't have desires. I can't be happy. I can't be sad. I can't be happy. I can't feel joy. I can't feel, sorrow. I can't grow because humility allows me to accept more truth so I know where to grow. I can't do anything without it. I can't learn. I can't be a student. I can't understand anything because humility lets me absorb new ideas. Right? Without humility, I can't absorb new ideas. So humility allows me to do a lot of things that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But if I have no faith in it, none of those things are going to happen. Because faith is a desire for humility. Faith is what drives me to humility. Faith is saying, it's a good thing. Go there, it's a good thing. See, when it comes to feeling feelings, most people have faith that it's a bad thing. They've got a corrupt faith. It's bad. So this is God's truth, that humility is good, and I need to develop faith in that. That's what I need to do. If I do not do that, my progress will be only driven by compensation. In other words, you'll be beaten into submission by the law, because that's the law's job is to cause you to have correction and reparation. That's the law's job. You're going to be beaten into submission by the law unless you do that. Right? Then you'll love the law if you do that. You won't need to be beaten in submission from it because you're already doing it. Like, if you really love the law, can you see? If you really love the law and its results, can you see you won't need to be forced into doing them? You'll want to do them. But when we don't love the law, when we don't have faith in the truth about humility, we don't love the law, and what happens then? We're going to have to be pressured into doing them somehow, to following the law at some point. And that's the purpose of the first 5 spheres of the spirit world. They're all there to pressure people into, through the law, to force people eventually to become loving. That's why they're there. If we all had faith in the truth about humility, the first 5 spheres of the spirit world would no longer exist. And everybody who passed from earth would pass into the 6th sphere. Right? And that's something that I would love to see happen soon. Of course, it's going to happen in my lifetime.
It's a pretty long life.
Because I've got an eternal life, right? So sooner or later I'll see that happen. But, it'd be nice sooner than later, because the average person from earth passes in such extreme pain and agony with regard to the amount of breaking of the law that's occurred, that it's completely unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. But because sin is a human creation, humans are going to have to deal with it. Because God didn't create sin, humans did. Right. So what are we going to talk about tomorrow? Well, what I'd like to do tomorrow is tomorrow we'll focus more on answering individual questions, but can you see the focus is not going to be on your feelings, is it? What we've got to do is answer your individual questions more based upon the principles surrounding the spiritual principle that needs to be learnt. That makes sense to you? If you learn the spiritual principle in your heart, the emotional and sexual and physical problems you face will be solved. Right? So it's far better if we can focus on the spiritual side of this. We also would like to discuss a little more about some of the principles that govern the spiritual principles that govern your life. And that would require some of you asking some questions about that, because tomorrow I'm not going to talk very much. Well, it's probably not right for me to say that. I'm not going to talk very much except in response to your questions. Does that make sense? So tomorrow the goal is for you to feel about your questions that you want to ask, and we will relate them to spiritual principles. And in the goal, so that we can eventually see where God's laws are being broken, so that we understand what we need to fix. That's the motivation of the discussion. If we can go in that direction, this will give you a feeling of power in your personal life over dealing with your problems. See, what I would like for each of you to feel is a deep confidence in humility, a deep confidence that you can deal with anything yourself, a deep confidence that all you've got to do is engage the principles and you will work through the problems emotionally and sexually and physically. You work through problems because you've engaged the spiritual principle. If we can grasp that by tomorrow evening, and start to feel some of that in ourselves emotionally, then it's going to go a long way to solving many of the problems that we face in our day-to-day life, right? Very important to focus on the principles. And the purpose of this is to bring us more into harmony with God's standard of love so that we can see that every one of God's laws he created because he loves us. Not because he's trying to make our life difficult and hard, and not because he's trying to torture you. He's not trying to browbeat you for the rest of your life, but every law is there as an expression of his love for you. And when you begin to understand and grasp that, you realize every law is helping me to grow in my joy and happiness in my experience of life. Every law is for that purpose. So that's where we would like to go tomorrow. Sound all right with you? Yeah. So, of course, tomorrow we may also involve some spirit questions in our discussion, because obviously we want to help the spirits who are in attendance as much as we would like to help you. So, and sometimes you'll find that their questions will cause you to ponder about what you may face in your future as well. So we'll do that too. All right. Thanks, guys. Now, every day we finish, Mary and I, obviously we've talked for 5 hours already. I've talked for 5 hours and Mary's talked for a bit less than that. But obviously by this stage we're needing a rest. And also we have a number of things we have to do with our system. We have to shut it all down and we have to get all the recordings, and then we take them home each night. And then I actually do some things with those recordings each night and put them up on some sites, so we've got a backup of them. And all of those things take a few hours every night to do. So just bear in mind that we're not going to be able to have many personal conversations with you during these days, because our energy is fixed on trying to have a group conversation with you. But I just would like to remind you of one thing. Any personal thing you would like to ask us has a principle involved. A good thing for you to try to start to do is start looking at what principles are involved with every personal thing you face. Okay? And we would like to recommend that tomorrow, when you ask your questions, we would like you to have given some thought to the principle involved that might be needing to be addressed because of that question. We want to help you to be able to help yourself more. We know that all of you, after we finish this group, will go home to your respective countries and your respective homes. And Mary and I are going to be on with it, talking to another group, and we're not going to be able to help you. We're not going to be able to talk to you when we're there. We're going to be talking to them. And it's physically impossible for any one person on earth even to help you with all of your problems. That's why God's given you a guide and a guardian to help you, to keep you alive, to help you function and to protect you. And God's given you your conscience so you ask God any question. You know, any person, including ourselves, we're limited. We're not going to be able to help you in every circumstance. So God can. And so this is why it's such an important thing that you focus more of attention on your relationship with God than your relationship with Mary and I. That makes sense? Yeah. And so what we would like you to do tomorrow with your questions is we would like you to ponder about the principle, and also, if possible, attempt to ask God, through the operation of your conscience, attempt to ask God what God feels about it. Can you do that with your questions tomorrow? So you want to ask God what God feels about it, and also you want to try to understand what principles might be involved with your question. Follow? So that's what we would like you to do tomorrow. Because what we're trying to do is to get you to put some more personal effort into your own life. Okay, well, thanks for your time today, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. We'll be here. We'll start again at 11. Yep. And
yeah, and if
is there any other things we need to note before people go?
no, just if you could please make sure you take all of your personal possessions with you when you leave.
Particularly your mobile phones.
Your mobile phones, yep. And yeah, let us know if you had any issues with the parking and so on. And if you could just check the bathrooms, the toilets, that everything's kind of tidy as well.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
For those of you who are more involved with the hall, can I just remind you that the bathroom windows will need to be locked tonight as well, because some of them are open now. So we just need to make sure that they're all locked as well.
Yeah, people involved with the care of the hall, toilets clear, check for personal possessions, windows closed, everything locked. So,
Yeah.
But Jay and I'll do a final check of that.
Yeah, we'll do a final check.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks guys. See you
Thank
tomorrow.
you, everyone. Thanks, guys. Good job.
Do it.